We just heard what this pedal does, now let's find out what we can use it for. Stick around because it's going to be a lot more informative than you could ever think it would. Welcome back to the Wipper Bass. So what does a high-pass filter do? Well, it basically lets the signal pass above an adjustable frequency. And in this case, from 25 to 400 Hz, while attenuating the frequencies below this cutoff point. And in this case, by 24 dBs, hence the H for high and 24 for decibels. But wait, isn't cutting the lows a bad thing for us bass players? I mean, it feels counterproductive and completely unnatural. Quite the contrary. I'm going to share with you 4 ways of how to use a high-pass filter. But just a quick word about the loops I recorded. I plugged into the Peterson Tuner and then into the Mozztronics CO2 Compressor and into the Palmer Wipper DI Box. And I reamped the recorded loops through the Palmer Daccapo and into my Stopko amp using a Lewitt 440 Pure mic. 1. Tighter sound, or in other words, clean up the low end. You probably heard about the word tighter when referring to a sound that has its lows attenuated. But if you haven't, you most probably heard about the word muddy when describing a sound that lacks definition in the lows. It's like muffled and you cannot clearly distinguish one note from another, especially if both the amp and the bass sound fat. Here's an example. Two, increased perceivable volume. Your amplifier needs more power to reproduce the lowest frequencies. And sometimes, despite using a powerful amp on stage, you cannot hear yourself properly. Why is it that guitar amps only need about 30 to 50 watts of power to compete in terms of volume with an acoustic drum set? Well, we need at least 3 times more power than guitarists do. At least because 200, 250 watts is perhaps a minimum, but yet sometimes it doesn't feel enough. Well, it's usually due to phase problems and the lowest frequencies competing between the bass and the drums and perhaps a deep synthetical sound, etc. So if you use a high-pass filter, your amp receives a signal that has less lows, and it will need less power to move the speakers, providing the level of the signal in the input is the same, meaning raising the input gain on your amp. Now, the general volume is reduced when using the H24 the more you turn up the frequency knob, as you will hear in the next sound sample, but that's perfectly normal. Still, I think we get the best results somewhere between 30 and 50 Hertz, cleaning up the low end while losing a minimum amount of volume. And again, if you do need more volume, just turn up the input gain of your amp. The thing is that if you cut the low end, the deepest frequencies, the perceived volume will be higher, clearer, and punchier. Unfortunately, you'll have to take my word on this, because in order to prove it, I would need a proper studio with many mics and many instruments so that you could hear properly what the high-pass filter does. Okay, where should I put a high-pass filter in my signal chain? I hear you say. Well, let's try it at the end of a hypothetical signal chain or in the effects loop of your amp, and you'll decide which one works best. Now, the difference when using the H24 in front of your amp or in its effects loop is not that obvious. So let's try a higher cutoff value of 100 Hertz instead of the previous value of around 40 Hz. And yes, there is going to be a slight volume drop. Generally, I think it does a better job when it's inside the effects loop of the amp. It seems to be a tiny bit clearer. And also because it's right before the power amp, and that means whatever signal comes before that is properly filtered through the H24. Three, makes your saturation pedals work better, especially when splitting the signal. Drive pedals, particularly tube screamer types, do include a kind of high-pass filter. The reason for it is that if you send the whole of the signal into the drive pedal, it will tend to be more sensitive to the predominant wavelengths, these being mostly lows. Now, it does work if you want a fat sound with the lows mostly distorted. But if you want to concentrate the saturation on the higher frequencies, then you need to attenuate the lows. And, for example, let them pass through clean and punchy. To do this, the best solution is to split the signal into a dry one and a wet one with the high-pass filter before the saturation pedals. This is what many bass-specific pedals do by incorporating a blend function. But the advantage of using a high-pass filter is that you select the cutoff frequency. So the signal goes into the input of the LS2 and the B loop goes into the Lele bass switch clean boost. Turns blue when it's on with the bass boosted, treble cut and mids in the mid position. And then the A loop goes into the H24 and into the bass big muff. And then you can mix the two signals with these two pots and then the output sends the signal to the amp. Four, protect your speakers. This pedal from DOD is called the Meat Box, but it's also kindly nicknamed as the destroyer of speakers. You can avoid this by placing the H24 right behind it. Obviously, it's a bit weird to boost the lows and cut them afterwards. But that is precisely the pull tech technique that we will talk about in another video. But the idea behind the pull tech technique is that you boost and you cut the lows simultaneously. And because it's not at exactly the same frequencies, it makes the sound warmer and fuller, yet without losing definition. One last thing you might ask yourself is, can't I have the same results with EQ pedals? Well, yes and no. In theory, if you cut the lowest frequencies on these pedals, you can have the same results. But you are limited by the fixed cut and boost frequencies, whereas the cutoff is sweepable in the H24. And usually the attenuation is less than 24 decibels. In this case, it's minus 15 decibels. And when it comes to the Boss, I don't know. I tried to find the information and wasn't able to. I must say the H24 sounds a bit more musical. So in summary, a tighter sound, increased perceivable volume, better saturation, especially when splitting the signal, speaker protection. So where would I recommend using the H24 in a signal chain? Well, either in the effects loop of your amp or right after an octaver pedal such as the Meat box. And right before saturation pedals in case you split the signal. One last thing, and then I promise I will stop talking. Pay attention to the bass in the songs you listen to. You will notice that 99% of the time it doesn't sound that big and it doesn't fill the low end, because these sub territory is usually for synth or kick drums or instruments like that. So we want a tighter bass sound. And actually a lot of plugins, for example, or cab IR include a cutoff frequency, and usually the cutoff point is around 30 to 50 hertz. So the idea is really to free up the space in the lowest frequencies so that your bass has presence in the lows but remains punchy and never muddy. So this is it for me. I really hope that you found this video informative enough to try out a high-pass filter for yourself. Check out SINE Effects. They make all kinds of very cool equalizer pedals. There's even an H24, which is a low-pass filter, so I'll let you guess what it does. And a distortion pedal that includes a high-pass filter, but that's for guitar. So if you're still watching this, thanks so much. It means the world to me. And if you haven't subscribed yet, well, please do so and hit the like button. And that's it. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.